Chapter 40. The Final Problem. This fax arrived an hour ago, Lestrade informed, giving Sherlock a large handwritten note. Hurry up. They're dying. Sherlock handed the note to Amelia, who sighed in frustration, closing her eyes in exasperation. What have you got for us? Lestrade asked the soon-to-be-wed couple. Need to find a place in the city where all 5 of these things intersect, Sherlock said, taking his list from out of his pocket and handing it to Lestrade, who read it aloud. Chalk, asphalt, brick dust, vegetation, Lestrade listed off. What the hell is this? Chocolate? I think we're looking for a disused sweet factory, Amelia said, crossing her arms over her chest. We need to narrow that down, Lestrade demanded. A sweet factory with asphalt? No, Sherlock said hurriedly. Too general. We need something more specific. Chalk. Chalky clay. That's a far thinner band of geology. Sherlock brought up a mental map of London, zooming in and out of various spots on the map. Brick dust? Lestrade said in shock. Building site. Brick from the 1950s, Amelia answered quickly. She moaned in anger, tying her hair in a knot atop her head. There's 1,000 of building sites in London, Lestrade groaned, running a hand over his face in distraught. I've got people out looking, Sherlock said. So have I, Lestrade said. Amelia, Sherlock said, prompting her to answer for him. Homeless network, faster than the police, Amelia answered for Sherlock, shooting her fiancé a dark look, far more relaxed about taking bribes. Amelia rolled her eyes at her own answer, as Sherlock received dozens of messages from his homeless network. Amy, Sherlock said, holding his phone out to show his fiancé a photo of a purple flower. Doran Pontisium? It matches, Sherlock returned to his mind palace, eliminating a few places from his map, focusing on one place that fit all the criteria. Addlestone. What? Lestrade said in confusion. There's a mile of disused factories between the river and the park. It matches everything, Sherlock answered, turning on his heel and hurrying out of the office with John on his heel. Right, come on, Lestrade said, Donovan hesitating to comply. Come on, or I'll have you fired, Amelia spat, not hiding her hatred for the sergeant. Sally jumped to her feet, knowing that Amelia was telling the truth. Amelia had a short patience to begin with, and when it came to people she found either stupid or annoying, he gave him one chance, or she'd do everything in her power to ruin their lives. Addlestone. Amelia, John, and Sherlock ran inside the dark, disused factory. Everyone, excluding Amelia, turned on lights to see in the dark. Donovan ordering the policemen who'd accompanied them to search in all directions. You look over there. Look everywhere, okay? Spread out. Please, spread out. Amelia led a team to another part of the factory, slightly disgruntled that Lestrade was barking orders such as, Look in there. Quietly, quietly. Amelia separated from the group, heading deeper into the factory, where she and Sherlock found a large pile of discarded wrappers surrounding a candle on a plate. She knelt down and touched the wick to the candle in mild interest. This was lit a moment ago. Moments ago. She looked over her shoulder and called out loudly, They're still here. Sweet wrappers, Sherlock observed as he picked up the wrappers to eye it closer. What's he been feeding you? Almost when his jaw twitched. Hansel and Gretel. He held the wrapping paper close to his light, sniffing the paper before briefly licking it, and grimacing at the taste. His eyes widened in realization. Mercury. What? Lestrade said in Sherlock. The papers, said Amelia in horror. They're painted with mercury. She covered her mouth with her hand as John growled. Oh, God. Lethal, Sherlock muttered. The more stuff they eat. He was killing them, John finished. But it's not enough to kill them on its own, Amelia pointed out quizzically. Taken in large enough quantities, eventually it would kill them. He didn't mean to be there for the execution, Sherlock said to Amelia, bouncing ideas off of her. Murder by remote control. He could be 1,000 miles away. The hungrier they got, the more they ate, the faster they died. He grinned. Neat. Sherlock, Amelia said in a disapproving warning tone. She cuffed him across the back of the head lightly, a smirk twitching at the corner of her lips. Over here, Sally called out loudly, her voice echoing in the empty space. Sherlock grinned and helped his fiancée up. Have I mentioned how brilliant you are? This case would have been increasingly more difficult without your help. Amelia laughed. Shut up, you, she teased. Most people call their girlfriends pretty, not brilliant. Have we not already covered this? Sherlock grumbled. I'd much rather have brilliant and boring, because if they're brilliant enough to entertain me, they're not boring. Sounds familiar. Amelia shot him a glare. You're a tease, Mr. Holmes. Don't call me that. It makes me sound old, Sherlock muttered, wrapping an arm around Amelia's waist as the two of them headed out of the factory. And soon you'll be Mrs. William Sherlock Scott Holmes. Amelia grimaced. Horrendous name, that is. Why would you parents ever name you that? Amelia bit her lower lip thoughtful, just as John showed up behind the couple. For God's sake, Sherlock said it. John said under his breath, then louder. Come on, you two. Enough flirting. Amelia stuck her tongue out at her brother in reply. Scotland Yard. Right, then, Sally said as she came out of the room with Claudette in it. The professionals have finished if the amateurs want to go in and have their turn. Amelia snorted loudly from where she was leaning on the table, idly examining her chipped nails. Professionals, she scoffed, her eyes briefly peeking up to meet Sally's dark gaze. You lot are hardly professionals. Lestrade glared at her before turning to look seriously at Sherlock. Now remember, she's in shock, and she's just 7 years old. So anything you can do to... He trailed off embarrassed. Not be myself? Sherlock finished hollowly, ignoring Amelia's muffled snickers. Yeah, Lestrade said sheepishly. Might be helpful. Sherlock glanced around to Amelia, obviously amused by the situation. Amelia laughed lightly, staying where she was, as Sherlock flattened the collar of his coat and stepped inside the room with John. Amelia looked up from her nails as a loud, childish scream rang out. Hearing Sherlock intensely saying, Claudette, listen to me. Out! Get out, Lestrade ordered, pushing Sherlock out of the room, while Claudette continued to scream. Sherlock stood by the window of Amelia's office, wondering how she'd managed to get an office at Scotland Yard to begin with. That, along with Claudette's scream at the sight of him. Sherlock looked out into the dark London skies, the view obscured by the slats of the blinds. Amelia sat at her desk, spinning around in the office chair in amusement, while Donovan stood by the door, glaring at Sherlock. Makes no sense, John mused. The kid's traumatized, Amelia said, explaining the psychology behind it. Something about Sherlock reminds her of the kidnapper. So what she said? John questioned. Hasn't uttered another syllable, Lestrade answered. And the boy? Asked Amelia, stopping her spinning to look at Lestrade with a questionably raised eyebrow. No, he's unconscious, still in intensive care, Lestrade informed her, pursing his lips. Sherlock had tuned out the conversation going on behind him as the building across the street lit up. On the second floor, 3 letters were spray-painted on 3 separate windows. Sherlock stared at them in shock, then his heart thudding in his chest. I-O-U. Seconds later, the lights went out. Sherlock frowned at the message. No doubt it was from Moriarty. Sherlock let out a soft sigh, tuning in on the other's conversation. Well, don't let it get to you, Lestrade said to Sherlock. I always feel like screaming when you walk into the room. In fact, so do most people. He looked round to Donovan, Lestrade, John, and Amelia. Come on. This is my office. I don't have to leave if I don't want to, Amelia said defiantly, crossing her arms over her chest as John and Lestrade left the room. Brilliant work you did, Donovan said to Sherlock, finding the clues from just a footprint. It's really amazing. Thank you, Sherlock said stiffly. Unbelievable, said Donovan as Sherlock hesitated before leaving the room with Amelia smiling. Ah, John said as Sherlock and Amelia stepped out onto the street. John raised his hand, hailing the fast-approaching cab. You okay? Amelia asked Sherlock. Thinking, Sherlock answered simply as the cab pulled up beside the trio. This is my cab. You two get the next one. Why? Amelia questioned, narrowing her eyes. You might talk, Sherlock replied. Too damn bad, Amelia growled. John can get his own. I'm coming with. Before he could argue, Amelia got into the cab, Sherlock sighing heavily and following his fiancée, closing the door behind them. John stared after the two of them, groaning as he waited for the next cab. Scotland Yard. Sally was in a large rectangular office, eyeing the photographs Amelia had skillfully taken, which were laying on the table. She looked down at the photos, deep in thought, Lestrade stopping outside the corridor, noticing her. He looked into the room as memories ran through Sally Donovan's mind. Problem? Lestrade asked as he stepped into the room. Sally looked at him, then back down at the photos. Taxi. Sherlock leaned back into his seat, lost in his own thoughts. He was vaguely aware of Amelia's hand laced to his own. Their hands a perfect fit for each other. He rubbed a soft circle on the back of her hand comfortably, sensing her distraught. Amelia hadn't been the same since this had started. Her silent habit of tapping piano notes on her knee had gone away, but she was paranoid and overcautious. She was certainly quicker, and her deductions were more solid, but her views on life had changed. Moriarty had affected her more than she let on. The TV screen on the back of the driver's seat, an advertisement starting to play which caused Amelia to jump at the sudden sound. This is a stunning evening wear set from here at London Taxi Shopping. Can you turn this off, please? Sherlock said to the driver, who didn't reply, letting the advert continue on. As you can see, the set of compromises of a beautiful... Can you turn this off? Sherlock started angrily, as the image of the screen began to crackle with static, as if another channel was trying to break through the first one. Amelia and Sherlock's gazes were locked on the screen as an image of Moriarty finally broke through, a wide grin on his face. The advert finally disappeared. James's smiling face showed on the background of a pale blue sky with white, fluffy clouds. Hello, said Jim, his voice sing-song. Are you ready for the story? This is the story of Sir Bocelot and his beautiful princess. Sherlock and Amelia couldn't do anything but stare at the screen. Scotland Yard. Sally showed Lestrade the photo incredulously. The footprint? That's all they had, a footprint. Yeah, well, you know what he's like. CSI Baker Street, Lestrade shrugged. And it is Amelia's job. Well, our boys couldn't have done it, Lestrade said. Donovan said snidely, still worried about Sherlock's credibility. Amelia had several diplomas dedicating that she was, in fact, the real deal. But Sherlock, he didn't have anything other than a recommendation from his brother and his fiancée. Well, that's why we need him, said Lestrade, trying to convince Donovan of Sherlock's innocence. He's better. That's one explanation. And what's the other? Lestrade asked suspiciously. Taxi. Sir Bocelot, said James' voice, smiling mechanically, was the bravest and cleverest knight at the Round Table. It was no surprise that he and the most beautiful princess of all the lands loved each other. But soon the other knights began to grow tired of his stories about how brave he was and how many dragons he'd slain. Amelia clenched her fists at James's not-so-subtle nod at her. James's background became dark and stormy. She couldn't help but watch, utterly horrified. Beside her, Sherlock had gone deathly pale, his hand now tightly clenched onto Amelia's, as if it were his lifeline. And soon they began to wonder, James said, rain starting to pour from the clouds behind him. Are Sir Bocelot's stories even true? She shook his head slowly. Oh, no. So they began to question the princess who stood by Sir Bocelot's side, and even she started to doubt him. Scotland Yard. Donovan's voice grew insistent. Only he could have found that evidence, she pressed. And then the girl screams her head off when she sees him, a man she'd never seen before. Unless she had seen him before. What's your point? Lestrade sputtered uncertainly. He couldn't fathom the idea of Sherlock being the one behind the case. Sherlock, despite all his rudeness, was one of Lestrade's few friends. You know what my point is. You just don't want to think about it, Sally said, as Anderson stepped into the room, standing opposite of Lestrade's desk, along with Donovan. You are not seriously suggesting he's involved, are you? Lestrade asked. Look at how he's changed. He's getting married, for Christ's sake. I think we have to entertain the possibility, Anderson said slowly. Lestrade staring at him, utterly bewildered. Lestrade covered his face with his hands in distraught, slowly starting to doubt the consulting detective's so-called talents. Taxi. So one of the knights went to King Arthur and said, James' voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, I don't believe Sir Bocelot's stories. He's just a big old liar who makes things up to make himself look good, and he tricked the princess into believing them too. And then even the king began to wonder, and slowly did the princess. James frowned, placing a finger to his mouth as he gazed off to something off-screen, lightning shooting from the clouds behind him. James shook his head slowly, but that wasn't the end of Sir Bocelot's problem. No, that wasn't the final problem. The camera panned out to reveal James holding the storybook in his hands. The end. A velvet curtain dropped down behind him, covering the stormy sky. There was a close-up of James' wide grin before the previous advert of the jewelry advertisement broke through. Stop the cab! Stop the cab! Sherlock roared as the taxi slowly pulled to the side of the road. Amelia had started shaking slightly, her right hand holding onto her forearm, where the scars were marked her otherwise blemish-free skin. What was that? Sherlock asked angrily as he jumped out the right door, sprinting towards to the driver's door. Amelia stepping out of the cab, still shaking. What was that? The cabby turned to face Sherlock, revealing James Moriarty. No charge, he said in a London accent, accelerating away. Sherlock chased after the cab, grabbing the door. Sherlock stopped his futile attempts to get Moriarty to come back, stopping in the middle of the road, looking around frantically for Amelia. Amy! He shouted at his fiancée, who was oblivious to the car coming up behind her. Just before it hit her, a man stepped off the pavement and pulled her off the road, yelling a "Look out!" Amelia instinctively reached out and struck the man, stopping as soon as she realized what had happened. Thank you, Amelia said, panting for breath. She couldn't quite place where she'd seen this man's face, but stuck her hand for him to shake. He took it hesitantly, 3 loud gunshots ringing out, and he collapsed to the ground, dead. Amelia let go in shock, Sherlock spinning around to find the source of the bullets. Unable to find the shooter, he stepped to his fiancée's side, holding her tightly. "Shh, you're all right," he comforted, as Amelia began to sob into his chest. "Sherlock! Amy!" John shouting, hopping out of the passing cab and heading to the couple. Almost immediately, Amelia's tears ceased. Sherlock cocked his head quizzically. Amelia wasn't afraid of crying in front of Sherlock. But the instant John stepped into the picture, she stopped. It wasn't until that moment that Sherlock realized how much Amelia truly wanted to protect the 2 most important people in her life. Not knowing what else to do, Sherlock ordered John to call 999, which Sherlock draped his coat around Amelia's shoulder, forcing her to take a seat in a nearby bench. It's him," John said in disbelief, as Amelia nodded and nodded her hands worriedly. Still seated on the bench, while an ambulance carried away the man's body. "It's him. Sherlock or something. Mycroft showed me his file. He's a big Albanian gangster, lives 2 doors down from us." Amelia tried not to hit herself at her stupidity. "He died because I shook his hand," Amelia observed. "What do you mean?" "He saves our lives, but he couldn't touch Amy." "Why?" Sherlock said almost instantly, storming off. "Where are we going?" "Here we go again," John muttered as he helped his sister up and followed Sherlock. 221B. Sherlock pulled off his scarf as he barged into the living room of 221B. Amelia carefully sitting Sherlock's coat down and switching it for her own. Sherlock made his way to his laptop on the table, Amelia moving to stand beside him. 4 assassins living right on our doorstep, Amelia said, narrowing her eyes at the screen. "They didn't come here to kill us. They won't have to keep us alive." John was completely unfazed by her use of us. He felt a tad excluded, but he knew Amelia was keeping secrets from both Sherlock and John. Sherlock, tending to know more than John. No doubt that the assassins wanted something that Amelia had only shared with Sherlock. John tried not to roll his eyes and walked over to the window. "We've got something that all of them want. But if one of them approaches us," Sherlock started, eyes flickering up to Amelia. "The others kill them before they can get it," Amelia finished with a sharp nod. Amelia finished with a sharp nod, Sherlock grunting in agreement as he rapidly typed into the laptop, calling up a list of local Wi-Fi networks. "All of the attention is focused on us," Sherlock noticed, scanning a list of the 5 networks, each of them in a different language. "There's a surveillance web closing in on us right now." "So what have you 2 got that's so important?" John questioned. Sherlock looked off into the distance, thinking. He ran a finger along the table beside him, lifting it and looking at the tip. "We need to ask about the dusting." He looked up to Amelia. "Get Mrs. Hudson." "Touchy," Amelia muttered as she went to comply. Sherlock ran around the room, checking the dust on each piece of furniture in the living room, including the self-portrait of his feet Amelia had kept on a shelf. Precise details in the last week. What's been cleaned?" "Well," said Miss Hudson, dressed in her night tie. "Tuesday, I did your lino." "No," Sherlock interjected quickly. "Is there? In here, in this room. This is where we'll find it. Any break in the dust line. You can put back anything but dust." He raised his hand from the last piece of furniture he'd been running his finger along, dramatically flaring his fingers. "Dust is eloquent." "What's he on about?" Mrs. Hudson asked Amelia. "I think the question you're looking for is, what is he on?" Amelia suggested jokingly, rolling her eyes at Sherlock when he glared at her and Mrs. Hudson. She shrugged half-heartedly as Sherlock climbed onto Amelia's chair to examine the bookcase. "Cameras. We're being watched." "What? Cameras?" Mrs. Hudson cringed. "Here? I'm in my night tie." This time it was Amelia who glared at Mrs. Hudson. "There are people trying to kill us, and that's what you're worried about?" Amelia ran out of the room as the doorbell rang. John and Mrs. Hudson following, Sherlock climbed down from the chair, checking in the eye sockets of his skull before climbing to the small tables of the right of the fireplace to examine the other bookshelf. Sherlock furrowed his eyebrows slightly as he noticed the slight displacement of dust around the far left book, then pushed it deeper into the bookshelf to reveal a camera. No, Inspector, said Sherlock without turning around. What? Lestrade said in shock. The answer's no, Sherlock clarified, stepping down with the camera held between two fingers. But you haven't heard the question. You want me to take me to the station, Sherlock said, stepping closer to the DI. You've just saving you the trouble of asking. Sherlock, Amelia warned, sighing. The scream? Sherlock interrupted. Yeah, Sherlock confirmed tiredly. Who was it? Amelia demanded fiercely. Donovan? I bet it was Donovan. Am I somehow responsible for the kidnapping? Sherlock said to Lestrade. Ah, Moriarty is smart. He planted that doubt in her head, that little nagging sensation. You're going to have to be strong to resist. You can't kill an idea, can you? Not once it's made a home there. On the last word, he placed a finger in the middle of Lestrade's forehead. Will you come? Lestrade said, exhausted. One photograph, that's his next move, Sherlock said, sitting down and typing in his laptop. Moriarty's game. First the scream, then a photograph of me being taken in for questioning. He wants to destroy me inch by inch. Then he'll take Amelia, and he'll truly have won. He picked up the camera briefly, looking at it before glancing at Lestrade. It is a game, Lestrade, but no, not one I'm willing to play. Give my regards to Sergeant Donovan. And tell her to piss off, will you? Amelia added in, meeting Lestrade's glare. He held her gaze for a moment before turning and heading down the stairs. Amelia turned to face Sherlock, who managed to hack into the camera, watching the live feed. Amelia walked over to the window, watching as Lestrade and Donovan drove off. They'll be deciding. Deciding? John questioned, arching his eyebrow as he sat down at the sofa. Whether to come back with the warrant and arrest me, Sherlock answered. You think? John said, tilting his head as he looked at Amelia. Standard procedure, came her nonchalant reply. Should have gone with him, John said to Sherlock. People will think. I don't care what people think, Sherlock objected. You'd care if they thought you were stupid or wrong, Amelia pointed out. No, that would just make them stupid or wrong. Amelia spun around to face Sherlock angrily, her lips tightly pursed. Sherlock, I don't want the world believing you're... Her voice cracked in pain, and she trailed off, unable to finish. That I am what? Sherlock said, lifting his head to look at Amelia in concern. A fraud, she answered simply. You're worried they're right. What? You're worried they're right about me? No. Then that's why you're so upset, Sherlock mused aloud. You can't even entertain the possibility that they might be right. You're afraid that you've been taken in as well. No, I'm not, Amelia said. Moriarty is playing with your mind too, Sherlock said, leaning forward. He slammed his hands down on the table fiercely, causing John, who was in the kitchen, to drop the milk and spill it on the floor, while Amelia remained completely calm, used to Sherlock's outbursts. Can't you see what's going on? Amelia cocked her head in interest. No, I know you're for real. 100%? Well, nobody could fake being such an annoying dick all the time, Amelia said without emotion, meeting Sherlock's gaze. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes sparkled with amusement. John let out a gag from the kitchen, breaking the couple's intimate moment. Both of their eyes flickered to him. John mimicked being sick in the sink before rolling their eyes and smiling at each other. That's what I do with my parents. That's funny. Chapter 41. Run. That's awesome. That rhymed. 41, run. Scotland Yard. Glegg Lestrade sat before the chief superintendent, Anderson and Donovan standing close by. The chief walked round his desk and took a seat, Lestrade wrinkling his nose in discomfort, feeling guilty that he, Donovan, and Anderson had ratted out Sherlock and Amelia. Sherlock Holmes and Amelia Watson, the superintendent repeated slowly. Yes, sir, Lestrade confirmed with a sharp nod. That bloke's been in the press and his, secretary? The superintendent asked for clarification, watching Lestrade carefully with his narrowed eyes. Lestrade said with another nod, although she's actually the National Security Advisor for MI6. I thought he was some sort of private eye, the superintendent said suspiciously. He is. She isn't, Lestrade stressed his words, sweat beading on his forehead in his worry, as he chewed the inside of his lip to keep himself calm. We've been consulting with them. That's what you're telling me? The superintendent asked, Lestrade unable to do anything but nod meekly. Not used him on any proper cases, though, have we? Well, one or two, Lestrade lied. Anderson snorted and looked down at his feet. Or 20 or 30, he muttered softly. What? The superintendent shouted in shock. Look, I'm not the only senior officer who did this. Gregson, Lestrade protested quickly. Shut up, the superintendent interrupted shortly. An amateur detective given access to all sorts of classified information And now he's a suspect in a case. I'm not even going to get started on letting the National Security Advisor do our work for us. With all due respect, sir, it's not her day job, Lestrade started. You're a bloody idiot, Lestrade, the superintendent yelled. Now go fetch them in right now. Lestrade hesitated, only making the superintendent sternly say, Do it. Lestrade frowned, standing up and leaving the room with Anderson and Donovan. Are you proud of yourselves? Lestrade hissed, angry that the three of them had betrayed Amelia and Sherlock. Well, what if it's not just this case? What if he's done this to us every single time? Anderson questioned, not hiding his hatred for the consulting detective. As he grabbed his coat, Lestrade stopped, taking out his phone and calling a number which could give Amelia and Sherlock a fighting chance. 221B. John lowered his mobile from his ear and switched it off. He turned to Amelia and Sherlock, who were both sitting on their chairs. Amelia plucking the strings of her violin. So still got some friends on the force, he said to Sherlock, who was well aware that most people on the force hated him. It's Lestrade, says they're all coming over here right now. Queuing up to slam on the handcuffs. Every single officer you ever made feel like a tit, which is a lot of people. Sherlock paid him no heed. Miss Hudson knocked on the door, frowning at the tension in the room. Oh, sorry, am I interrupting? Sherlock rolled his eyes dramatically and looked away. Miss Hudson turned to John and Amelia. Some chap delivered a parcel. I forgot. Marked perishable. I had to sign for it. John took the jiffy bag from Mrs. Hudson, showing it to Amelia when she saw the red wax seal on the flap. Amelia tapped Sherlock's arm, who looked up, eyes widening slowly when he saw the seal. Funny name, Mrs. Hudson came on. German, like the fairy tales. Amelia rose to her feet and walked over to John, taking the envelope from him and opening it. Turning ashen almost immediately, she took out an item as Sherlock came over beside her, stiffening when she saw the large gingerbread man. Burnt to a crisp, she said harshly, as sirens rang outside. What does it mean? John asked just as the siren stopped. Someone pounded on the doors downstairs, the entire flat shaking from it. Police! Yelled a voice. I'll go, Mrs. Hudson offered, heading off downstairs. Sherlock, Amelia heard Donovan say from downstairs, We need to talk to you. Amelia pursed her lips. She seemed to be doing a lot of that lately, she noticed. Amelia ran a hand through her hair briefly before putting the gingerbread man back in the envelope and setting it on the table. She let out a low, feral growl before heading out of the flat to help Mrs. Hudson. Don't barge in like that, Mrs. Hudson said to Lestrade and the other police officers, upset by their behavior. Have you got a warrant? Amelia demanded fiercely, blocking Lestrade from coming up the stairs. Have you? Leave it, Amelia, Lestrade said tiredly. No, because what you're doing is illegal, Amelia snapped. I want you to leave this flat and never come back. Amelia, please, Lestrade begged with a heavy sigh. Fuck you, Amelia shouted, a loud crack resonating in the narrow staircase. Her hand went red from her striking Lestrade's face. Really? Manners, Mrs. Hudson gasped unapprovingly. Sherlock walked over to the coat rack and slid on his coat calmly, just before he'd gotten it on. Lestrade and the others stepped into the room. Two officers secured Sherlock's wrists behind him, while Lestrade said, Sherlock Holmes, I'm arresting you on suspicion of abduction and kidnapping. He's not resisting, John said, gesturing to Sherlock's handcuffs. It's all right, John, Sherlock said calmly. He's not resisting, Amelia agreed, glaring at Lestrade. So no, it's not all right. This is ridiculous. Get him downstairs now, Lestrade ordered the officer who'd just cuffed Sherlock. Sherlock shot Amelia a weak smile as he was escorted downstairs and marched out the door. You know you don't have to started with a furious scowl at Lestrade. Don't try to interfere or I shall arrest you too, Lestrade threatened, getting up into Amelia's face. Amelia narrowed her eyes as she glared at Lestrade. She clenched her jaw. Screw it, she said under her breath. She swung a punch at Lestrade's face, breaking his nose. The blood began to dribble down his chin almost instantaneously, before she kneed him in the ground with force, which forced Lestrade to double over in pain. As Lestrade moaned in pain, another officer cuffed Amelia. Lestrade managed to spit out, I warned you. Amelia snorted as she walked down the stairs, a limping Lestrade following her. She stopped just as she reached the outside door, leaning against the dorm frame casually. You know, you technically didn't recite my rights. I could sue you for that, especially since you're arresting your superior. Shut up and go stand next to Sherlock, growled Lestrade, pointing to Sherlock, who was standing by the police cruiser. Gladly, Amelia said with a pleading laugh. What did you do? Sherlock grumbled as Amelia stepped beside him. sitting on the hood of the car. May or may not have given Lestrade internal bleeding, but to hell with it, she said flippantly. Sherlock chuckled. Impressive. I try, Amelia said as an officer cuffed her to Sherlock's left hand. You done? John said to Donovan, who was clearly enjoying this. Oh, I said it, Donovan said smugly as she stepped into the room. John said, too angry to reply with anything else. First time we met, Donovan prompted. Don't bother. Despite John's warning, Donovan continued on. Solving crimes won't be enough. One day he'll cross the line. Now ask yourself, what sort of man would kidnap those kids just so he can impress us all by finding them? Mrs. Hudson gasped at her implication. Donovan, said the superintendent as he stepped into the room. Sir? Donovan nodded respectfully. Got our man? Asked the superintendent, causing John's muscles to twitch in his jaw. Yes, sir, Donovan said uncertainly. Looked a bit of a weirdo, if you ask me, the superintendent said, John immediately turning to face him accusingly. Often are those vigilante types. He stopped looking around the room to see John glaring at him. What are you looking at? Then John swung. Amelia couldn't help let out a loud cough as the superintendent stepped out into the street, holding a handkerchief to his bleeding nose. She hopped off the hood of the car, Sherlock shooting her a glare as their joined handcuffs cut into his wrist, smirking as John was slammed into the car beside Sherlock. Joining us, Sherlock said lightly. Yeah, John said, slightly forlorn. Apparently it's against the law to chin the chief superintendent. I better change that, Amelia mused out loud, looking up to the dark night sky as she tried to identify the constellations, which were covered by the clouds drifting through the night. Amelia hummed, as another officer cuffed John to Sherlock's left hand. Bit awkward, this. Huh? Huh, John contained a laugh. No one to bail us. I was thinking more about our immediate and daring escape. Sherlock shrugged, looking down at the radio, laying on the dashboard of the car. Looking down at the radio laying on the dashboard of the car, which was squealing with the dispatcher's orders. Oh, for God's sake, Amelia moaned with an eye roll. What? John said worriedly. Sherlock reached through the open window with his right hand, dragging Amelia forward and pressing down on the talk button of the radio. The officers around the trio bent over in pain, as feedback sounded through their earpieces. Sherlock reached behind him, again nearly causing Amelia to topple over, and grabbing the pistol from the nearest officer, and raised it. Ladies and gentlemen, Sherlock called out, will you all please get on your knees? When no one moved, Sherlock fired it twice towards the sky. Now would be good. He lowered it and pointed it at the police. Do as he say, Lestrade demanding, gesturing everybody down to their knees. Just so you're aware, John said as the three of them began to back away. The gun is his idea. I'm just my hostage, Sherlock said, transferring the gun to the opposite hand and holding it to John's head. Amelia elbowing him in the ribs as the metal cut into her wrist. Hostage, John hissed. Yes, that works. That works. Amelia shrugged, and I'm just along for the ride. Why the hell not, You only live once. Later, losers. Sherlock smirked at her statement while everyone else looked peeved, excluding John, who was eyeing his sister in distaste. The three of them backed away, Sherlock still keeping the gun on the police. So what now? Asked John. Doing Moriarty wants. I'm becoming a fugitive, Sherlock answered. Run. Okay, I can't think of that without... Yeah, that scene kind of makes me almost think of a Doctor Who scene with the Rose and the mannequins. Okay. This makes this chapter 42, Richard Brooke. Take my hand, Sherlock ordered as they ran down a nearby alleyway, sprinting furiously. Both of you, now. Now people will definitely talk, John said, laughing weakly, as they heard the sirens approaching at the junction before them. Sherlock turned sharply to his left, dropping the pistol in the process. It clattered to the ground loudly. The gun! Leave it, Amelia ordered, as Sherlock dragged her and John down a side alley. Sherlock and the trio approached a meter-high railing which blocked their path. Sherlock and Amelia leapt up onto the top of the nearby dustbins with ease, vaulting over the top of the railing. John, unused to such activities, struggled to follow them and was left behind, his hand caught over the railing and his face pressed into the metal bars. Sherlock, Amy, wait! John demanded, reaching through the railing with his free hand and grabbing Sherlock's coat, which dragged him closer towards the short blogger. We're going to need to coordinate. Go to your right, Sherlock instructed, looking around wildly. Huh? John said quizzically. Go to your right, Sherlock repeated. Everybody wants to believe it. That's what makes it so clever, Sherlock exclaimed, looking to John. A lie. That's preferable to the truth. He turned away bitterly. All my brilliant deductions were just a sham. No one feels inadequate. Sherlock Holmes is just an ordinary man. What about Mycroft? Amelia suggested, taking a hairpin from her hair and starting to pick the cuff, keeping Sherlock and Amelia together. He could help us. She groaned as Sherlock dragged her and John to the other side of the alley. They were using her free hand to whack her fiancé. A big family reconciliation, Sherlock said in amusement. Now's really not the moment. He spun around in a circle, Amelia nearly dropping the hairpin she had in her grasp. Yeah? Yes, I'll get that in a second. Okay. Sherlock, John said, elbowing Sherlock on the side to turn the consulting detective in the direction he was facing. We're being followed. I know we couldn't outrun the police. That's not the police, Amelia murmured as the cuff dropped from her and Sherlock's wrist and fell to the ground. Then louder, it's one of my new neighbors from Baker Street. Let's see if he can give us some answers. She ran down the street, Sherlock letting out a heavy sigh and following her, dragging a reluctant John. Amelia stopped the trio as they reached the corner, peeking around the corner to check for the police. Seeing that the street was clear, excluding a double-decker bus headed to Baker Street Station, which was quickly approaching, Amelia smirked to herself and pressed against the wall of the alley once again. Where are we going? John asked, slightly out of breath. Amelia looked to Sherlock, who nodded slightly, signifying his approval of her plan. Turning back to John, Amelia grinned. We're going to jump in front of that bus. What? But Amelia had already run into the street, Sherlock going after her and dragging John behind him. Just as Sherlock and Amelia had stepped onto the road, the assassin sprinted after the two of them. Amelia stopped shortly in front of the bus, Sherlock and John standing next to her, none of them moving. The assassin charged into the road, throwing Amelia, Sherlock, and John out of the way. Sherlock pulled the assassin to his feet, taking the gun out of the assassin's jeans pocket, cocking it and holding it to the assassin's head. Tell me what you want from us. The assassin didn't reply. Sherlock's gaze hardened, and he moved the gun's nozzle closer to the assassin. Tell us. He left it at your flat, answered Suljamini. Who? Sherlock pressed. Moriarty, Suljamini said. God damn it, of course he did, Amelia muttered, looking off into the distance with a cold expression. A smile tugged at the corner of her blood-red lips, and she looked back to Sherlock and John with an amused smile. What? Sherlock pressed Suljamini, all four of them getting on their feet. Slowly, Sherlock keeping his gun on Suljamini. The computer code, replied the assassin. Of course, Sherlock said, marveling at his own stupidity. He's selling it, the program he used to break into the tower. He planted it when he came round. Amelia jumped, startled, as 3 gunshots rang out. Suljamini reeled back and dropped to the ground dead. Sherlock started upwards, searching for the source of the shooter. He swung around, John, Amelia, and Sherlock running down the street. Amelia pulled her brother and her fiancé down into a doorway, hidden in an alley, hearing the shouts of the police cruiser fast approaching. Amelia waited for a moment, trying to catch her breath, while waiting for the cruiser to leave. It's a game-changer, said Sherlock. It's a key. It can break into any system, and it's sitting in our flat right now. That's why he left the message telling everyone where to come. Get Sherlock. We need to get back into the flat and search. He glanced at Amelia, and he's made it very clear that Amelia is his. CID'll be camped out, John said. I planted on you two. It's another subtle way of smearing my name, Sherlock answered grimly. Now I'm best pals with all those criminals. Yeah, well, have you seen this? Amelia said, seeing a copy of The Sun on a newsstand nearby. A headline telling them of the upcoming exposé by Kitty Riley. Amelia handed it to Sherlock, letting out a loud sigh. A kiss and tell, John said, recognizing that it was a copy of The Sun he'd seen at Mycroft's. Some bloke called Rich Brooke. Sherlock turned his head to face John in interest, Amelia mimicking him. Fuck, she said quietly. John narrowed his eyes. Who is he? Kitty's Riley place. Kitty made sure to lock her car as she got out, feeling slightly nervous. All this talk about criminals lately, and she was about to change everything with her upcoming article. Her upcoming article would be her big break. She could feel it. She stepped into her flat, pausing at her living room door as she realized it was slightly ajar. She was certain she had closed it before she left home. She reluctantly pushed it open and flicked on the lights, greeted with the sight of John Watson and Sherlock Holmes cupped together, sitting on the love seat, while Amelia Watson sat on the armrest next to Sherlock as she played with her engagement ring. Too late to go on the record? Sherlock asked, drumming his fingers on his knee. Hold still, Amelia hissed as she picked Sherlock's handcuff, releasing the impatient detective. She managed to finish it and move on to John's side. She knelt on the ground, her hair tumbling down from the bun she tied atop her head. Unstable due to Amelia having had to take out several hairpins to pick the cuffs. Congratulations, Amelia said to Kitty sarcastically. Sherlock started to pace in front of Kitty. The truth about Sherlock Holmes. The scoop that everybody wanted, and you got it. Bravo, Sherlock sneered sarcastically. I gave you your opportunity, Kitty said innocently. I wanted to be on your side, remember? You turned me down, so... And then behold, someone turns up and spills all the beans, Sherlock said disapprovingly. How utterly convenient. Who is Brooke? Kitty shook her head, refusing to answer. Oh, come on, Kitty. No one trusts the voice at the end of a telephone. Amelia finished with John's handcuffed and John rubbing at his sore wrist. There you go, said Amelia. There are all those fugitive little meetings in cafes, those sessions in the hotel room where he gabbled into your dictaphone, Sherlock continued on, slightly impressed that Amelia had picked the lock so quickly. How do you know that you can trust him? A man turns up with the Holy Grail in his pocket. Where's his credentials? What were his credentials? Kitty looked to the door as she heard someone come in. She rose to her feet with concern painted across her face. None other than James Moriarty stepped into the room, looking more disabled than Amelia had ever seen him before. He hadn't shaved for what appeared to be days, and his hair was ruffled as if he hadn't brushed it in the morning. He carried his shopping bag in his hand full of groceries and bags drooped under his tired brown eyes. Darling, they didn't have any ground coffee, so I just got normal. James trailed off as he finally looked up, staring in terror at the sight of Amelia and Sherlock, their eyes widening as well. James dropped the bag, backing away quickly until he bumped into a wall. He raised his hand to cover his face protectively, then said with a traveling voice, You said they wouldn't find me here. You said that I'd be safe here. You are safe, Richard, Kitty said calmly. I'm a witness. He wouldn't harm you in front of witnesses. John pointed at Moriarty, his face distorted in utter shock. So that's your source? Moriarty is Richard Brooke? John bared his teeth, glaring at Moriarty in rage, and his breath came in heavy pants due to his fury. Of course he's Richard Brooks, Kitty said. There is no Moriarty. There never has been. What are you talking about? John demanded, voicing the words Amelia couldn't say. She'd gone as white as a sheet, her entire posture slouched. She was tired of this whole ordeal. He could tell by the way that even her hair seemed limp and lifeless, as if Amelia could care less about it, which was unusual for her sister, as she used her beauty as a weapon, which meant she almost always had to look perfect. John wasn't far off in his assumptions. Amelia was quite exhausted with this case. She wanted Moriarty thrown in jail. She wanted to marry Sherlock and to settle down, possibly have kids. She was realizing now that how bleak her future was going to be. If Moriarty was left on run, there'd be no place Amelia could hide. She'd always be looking over her shoulder, and a child would be near impossible. She wasn't sure if she could get married, which sent a pang through her chest. She had gotten so far, only to have everything taken from her, like an angel fallen from heaven. Out of habit, Amelia rubbed the scars on her forearm, already knowing what the words meant. Already knowing the words by heart. A sweetly scented angel fell. She laid her head on my disbelief, and battled me with her ever smile. Amelia was starting to unravel the meaning behind the line. She was the angel. She understood that now. And she had most definitely fallen for Sherlock. The rest was a bit puzzling. She wasn't sure what disbelief was supposed to mean. She certainly hadn't been doing any smilings recently. No doubt the part that she had yet to understand had to do with Moriarty's plan. "Look him up," Kitty instructed John. "Rich Brooke, an actor Sherlock Holmes hired to be Moriarty." Sherlock stared at James, a hateful fire burning behind his cold, blue-green eyes. Sherlock had yet to understand what James's plan was, but if it was planting seeds of doubt into the minds of the people he loved, James was most certainly winning. How could you kill a thought? The thought would take root in the deepest pit of the mind, tainting it and consuming all rationality. One thing that Sherlock understood from his many philosophy lessons with Amelia was that people buried their thoughts deep in their subconsciousness, only to be awakened by a scenario where something was in danger, whether it be their life or their trust. And once trust was broken, there'd be nothing left. "Miss Watson, I know you're a good woman. Don't hurt me," James said in a weak, shaky voice, breaking into a corner like a small puppy who is suddenly threatened by a large wolf. And Amelia was most definitely a wolf by now. Her gaze had hardened and gone cold. Her entire body quivered with a barely contained fury. Her teeth were bared, her lips curled into a snarl as she walked toward James. "No, you are Moriarty," Amelia nearly screamed, her voice gutturally in her rage. She turned to look at Kitty briefly, her eyes never leaving James, mewling for him. "We've met, remember? You were going to blow John up. You made me kill Jackson. Hell, you shot me and threatened to kill me too many times to count." Her voice cracked on the last sentence, voicing James' accent. James' actions took it a whole new level, breaking Amelia's resolve entirely. Until that moment, she believed that there was some sort of retribution for James, some way he could redeem himself. That hope was long gone. Her James had changed. She couldn't even recognize the man before her now. He was no longer the carefree, happy-go-lucky man she met all those years ago in the cramped cafe. He'd changed into a killer, a liar, a psychopath, a monster. She wasn't quite sure what to do with this sudden revelation. James covered his face with his hands, holding them back up again. I'm sorry, he said, choking on his cries. He gestured to Sherlock. "He paid me. I needed the work. I'm an actor. I was out of work. I'm sorry, okay?" "Sherlock, you better explain, because I'm not getting this," John said, his breath heavy. "Oh, I'll be doing the explaining in print," Kitty said, handing John the folder with Kitty's draft of her upcoming article. "It's all here. Conclusive proof." She looked at Sherlock. "You invented James Moriarty, your nemesis." "Invented him?" John repeated hoarsely. "Mm-hmm," said Kitty. "Invented all the crimes, actually. And to cap it all, you made up a master villain." "Oh, don't be ridiculous," Amelia snapped in anger, clenching her fist tightly, so her nails cut into her palm, drawing small pricks of blood. "Ask him," Kitty ordered, pointing to James. "He's right here. Just ask him. Tell him, Richard." "Look, for God's sake, this man was on trial," John said fiercely. "Yes," Kitty said accusingly, pointing at Sherlock, who stared at Kitty in silence. "And you paid him. You paid him to take the rap. Promised you'd rig the jury. Not exactly a West End role, but I'll bet the money was good." She walked over to James, placing her arm around his shoulders as she helped him stand. But not so good he didn't want to sell his story. "I am sorry," James said plaintively, eyeing Amelia with a pleading look. I am sorry. "So this is a story that you're going to publish," Amelia said stiffly. "The big conclusion of it all? Moriarty's an actor?" She shook her head in disbelief, wrapping her arms around her shoulders. "He knows I am," James said. I have proof. Show him, Kitty. Show her something." "Yeah, show me something," Amelia demanded, folding her arms over her chest and pursing her lips. Kitty shed her momentary glare. Walking across the room, Sherlock remained where he stood, completely still as he watched James. James lowered his hands, briefly smiling mechanically, showing his true self. Sherlock gave a sarcastic half-smile back, although there was no humor in his cold eyes. Kitty took out a folder from her bag, walking back to Amelia and handing it to her. Almost instantly, James slipped back into his Richard Brooke persona, his voice trembling and panicked. "I'm on TV. I'm on kids' TV. I'm the storyteller," James said as Amelia flipped through the files of Richard Brooke, contact details, and newspaper clippings. I'm the storyteller. It's on DVD." He looked to Sherlock and Amelia, still scanning the files. James gestured towards Amelia, a beginning look in his eyes. "Just tell him. It's all coming out now. It's all over. Just tell them. Tell her." Sherlock bared his teeth in anger, taking a few steps towards James. "It's all over now." "No." He backed away from Sherlock. Don't you touch me. Don't you lay a finger on me." Stop it! Stop it now! Sherlock growled in anger. Don't hurt me! James shouted, running up the stairs and bolting off. Don't let him get away, John said as he, Sherlock, and Amelia ran after James. Okay, I heard my name being called. I swear to fucking God, James, I am sick and tired of your games. Amelia snarled as she chased after him, her anger motivating her. Leave him alone, Kitty yelled at Amelia as James ran into the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind him, but not before giving Sherlock an accomplished smirk. Sherlock struggled to open the door, then barged in, but James had already disappeared through the open window. No, 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 no. He'll have backup, Sherlock said, shaking his head as he handed back to the stair. Katy stayed out of his way, but forced him to slow down with a dark look in her dull blue eyes. Do you know what, Sherlock Holmes? Kitty said in a low growl. I look at you now, and I can read you, and you repel me. Sherlock stiffened, turning and heading out of the door. Amelia shoved Kitty out of her way, nearly sending the journalist toppling over. Amelia glared at Kitty violently, flipping James off before storming out of the flat. She, John, and Sherlock stepped out onto the street, Sherlock starting to pace in the middle of the road. Can he do that? John questioned. Completely change his identity, make you the criminal? He's got my whole life story, Sherlock answered in a mutter. That's what you do when you sell a big lie. You wrap it up in the truth to make it more palatable. Your word against his, Amelia said under her breath. He's been sowing doubt into people's minds for the last 24 hours, Sherlock said in exasperation. There's only one thing he needs to do to complete his game. And that's to... He trailed off, stopping dead as he came to realization. Amelia looked up from the Richard Brooks folder she was looking through. Sherlock, John said royally. Something I need to do, Sherlock said quietly. What, can I help? Amelia asked. No, on my own, Sherlock said, Amelia's face falling. Sherlock momentarily regretted his words, but it was for the best. He needed to protect her, especially if what he had thought about Moriarty's plan was true. Amelia was a large part of Moriarty's game, and he needed to protect Amelia at all cost. Sherlock looked up at Amelia, who was watching Sherlock with a sad expression. Sherlock turned on his heel and walked away. Amelia watched him leave, John quickly following the consulting detective. Amelia hesitated, then looked down at the engagement ring nestled around her finger before she headed the opposite direction, silent tears streaming down her own cheeks.